Hello everyone, in this tutorial, I'll be showing you how to make a full platformer game in just 27 minutes. Anyways, let's get started. So I'm going to first start with the player, and for the player, I'm just going to use this default cat sprite. So I'm going to go to events and drag a when flag clicked. Then I'll go to looks and make sure to show the cat. Alright, and I think I'm going to make the player a bit smaller. So I'll change this size number from 100 to something like 50. Alright, now it's a bit smaller, and I'll drag a set size to block under the when flag clicked and change the 100% to 50%. And now I'll create a new level. So I'll click this button right here and paint a new sprite. Okay, so inside of this drawing area, I'll select the rectangle tool and I'll create a ground for the player to stand on. So inside of this fill box, I'll choose a brown color for the ground. Okay, and I'll draw it somewhere around here, and I'll remove the outline, so I'll just delete the 4. Okay, and I also want to add some grass on top of this ground. So I'll select the rectangle tool again and change the fill color to a green color. And then I'll draw a rectangle over the top part of the ground. And to make it a bit better, I'm going to make some small rectangles like this. And I'm going to rotate them 45 degrees like so. And I'll drag them over our long green rectangle like this to make some sharp edges like grass. And then I'm going to copy and paste these squares all along the long green rectangle. Alright, so I finished drawing my level, and now let's go inside of the code, and I'll drag a when flag clicked, and go to motion, drag a go to XY block, and let's set it to go to X0 and Y0. And inside of the stage, I'm going to go to backdrops, and I'll just create a light blue rectangle for the sky. So I'll make this a blue fill like so. And now that we have our level ready, we can now start working on the player movement and collision. So let's go inside of our cat sprite. And by the way, I'm going to name this player, and I'll name this sprite level. Okay, so let's go inside of our player. And of course, we want our cat to spawn somewhere over here at the start of the level. So let's drag it over here and then drag a go to XY block and put it under the when flag clicked. Alright. So now let's first add some gravity and ground detection. So let's go to control and drag a forever loop, put it under the when flag clicked. And let's go to my blocks and create a new block. I'll call this something like up/down movement. Alright, and then I'll add 2 number inputs. So click this twice. And in our first one, I'm going to call this jump height. And I'll name the second one, let's say fall speed. And now make sure to select run without screen refresh, and then click OK. Alright, so now we have our player up-down movement block, and inside of this block, we want the player to be able to go up or down based off of its Y speed. And now let's go to motion, and drag a change Y by block, and let's go to variables, create a new variable, and I'll call this something like Y velocity, and then click OK. And let's change Y by Y velocity. Okay, and now let's go to control and drag an if else and drag this under the change Y by block. And inside of this if, let's check if touching the level, and then inside of this else, let's go to variables and drag the change Y velocity, and then let's drag the fall speed variable over here inside of the change Y velocity by block. So pretty much the Y velocity is the speed at which the player is moving, and this just makes the player fall down due to gravity, or whatever fall speed you have over here. And to make the player actually stand on the ground and not go through it, let's go to control and grab a repeat and drag it inside of the if touching level. And inside of this repeat, let's go to operators, scroll down, and grab an abs of block, and change the absolute into ceiling, and then drag another abs of block, and leave it like so. And then let's go to variables and drag the y velocity variable inside of the abs of. All right, and let's drag this entire thing inside of the repeat. And then inside of this repeat loop, let's go to control, drag another if, and go to sensing, and drag touching level. And lastly, inside of this, let's go to motion, drag a change y by block, drag it inside of all of this. And then inside of operators, let's grab a divided by operator, drag it inside of the change y by, and let's go to variables, grab the y velocity variable, drag it on the left side, and let's go to operators, grab the abs of block, drag it on the right side, and lastly, let's go back to variables, drag the y velocity variable on the right side of the absolute. And oh yeah, one more thing, let's go back to operators and grab a multiplication operator and drag this entire thing on the left side and multiply it by -1. All right, and now let's go to variables and drag a set variable block and put it after this repeat loop, but still inside of this if touching level. And let's set y velocity to 0. All right, so pretty much what this does right now is that if we put this block inside of the for loop, and let's just put a value for the fall speed. So let's try something like -1. Then if we, for example, make the player spawn over here, which is x11 and y101, then the player will fall down until it touches the ground because its y velocity variable is always decreasing since we put in -1 for the fall speed, and the player is also changing its y position by the y velocity. So the player is speeding up as it falls further and further, and this code over here just prevents the player from sinking into the ground. Because to put it simply, when the player is trying to go down and it detects the ground, then the player will go up as much as it is going down. All right, so now let's make the player able to jump up. So first off, under the when flag clicked, let's drag a set y velocity to 0 right before the forever loop, just to make sure that the y velocity is reset. And let's go to control and drag an if else, and let's drag this after the repeat loop. So after this loop right here. Okay, and inside of this else, let's drag this y velocity back to 0. And then inside of this if, let's go to operators and first drag an and. And let's first check if not y velocity is greater than 0. So go to variables, grab a y velocity greater than 0. And if, let's go to sensing, key up arrow is pressed. Then let's go to variables and set the y velocity to the jump height over here. All right, so this pretty much just checks if the player is touching the ground, and if the up arrow key is pressed, then the player changes the y velocity to whatever amount. And we can set our jump height amount over here. So let's try something like 12 for now, and let's try it out. So if we click the up arrow key, then as you can see, our player jumps up like so. And we can't jump while the player is mid-air. All right, cool. So that's pretty much the up-down movement, but now of course, we want to move the player left and right. So let's create a new block, and I'll call this something like left-right movement, or right-left movement. Okay. And again, let's add 2 number inputs. And for this one, let's call it move speed. Okay, and for the second one, let's call this drag. So pretty much how slippery the ground will be. And let's also make sure to run without screen refresh and click OK. All right, so we have our right-left movement block. And let's first drag the right-left movement custom block inside of our forever loop after the up-down movement. All right, and inside of this block, some of the code is really similar to the up-down movement code. So let's right-click duplicate all of these blocks, and let's drag this under the right-left movement. All right, so first off, when we're moving left or right, we don't want to change y. Instead, we want to change x. So let's go to motion and drag a change x by block. And instead of y velocity, we actually have to create a new variable and call this x velocity. Okay. And let's change x by x velocity. Okay, so now we can drag this back up into here, and we can keep this if touching level part. However, instead of repeating the ceiling of absolute of y velocity, we want to repeat the ceiling of absolute of x velocity because we're moving left and right. And inside of here, instead of change y by, we want to do change x by. And let's drag this inside of the change x by. And instead of y velocity, we want to change it to x velocity. Okay, so make sure to change both. And now we should be fine for this part. And we don't actually want this if else because this checks whether the player is jumping. So let's take that out. And instead, let's drag a set x velocity to 0 after this repeat. And we don't actually need this either. So we can actually just change this if else into just an if. So let's drag an if and drag this inside of this part and drag this inside of the if, and then take the if else out and drag this if back into the block. All right, and now we want to move the cat left or right when we press the left or right arrow keys. So let's drag an if else and drag it after the if touching level. And let's go to sensing and check if key right arrow pressed. Then first of all, let's point the player towards the right. So that means we are going to be pointing the player in the direction of 90 degrees. And then inside of the else, let's go to control and drag an if key left arrow key pressed. Then let's go to motion and point the player towards the left. So that's negative 90. Okay. However, if we click this point in direction negative 90, then as you can see, our player is upside down. And to prevent that, we can just scroll down, and there's this set rotation style block. And if we set it to left or right, then as you can see, now the player points towards the left in the correct orientation. So we can just drag this under the when flag clicked, and now we should be fine when the player points to the left or to the right. All right. And now we also want the player to move if we click the right or left arrow keys. So let's go to variables and let's set the x velocity to, let's drag our move speed from here and drag it inside of the x velocity. All right. And for the left arrow key pressed, we can just right click, duplicate this set x velocity block. And instead of setting it to move speed, we actually want to multiply it by -1 because it's moving in the opposite direction. And now we should be fine for the left and right arrow keys. All right, and lastly, let's go to variables, and we want to set the x velocity by our current x velocity. Let's go to operators, multiplied by the drag. So let's drag the drag variable inside of here, and then drag all of this inside of the set x velocity. All right, so let's put some numbers for the move speed and drag. So the first value is for move speed. Let's try something like 10. And then the second value is for drag. So let's try something like 0.6. So let's try it out. And if we click the left arrow key and right arrow keys, then as you can see, the player moves. Awesome. And the player can jump up and down as well. And it also collides with the walls, like so. All right. However, there is one problem, which is that, as you can see, the player can sort of hang on the edge, and that's because of the player's head. So to prevent problems like this from happening, we can go inside of the costumes, and let's duplicate our current cat sprite. All right, and we can create something called a hitbox. So let's rename this costume name to hitbox. And then to create our hitbox, it's super simple. We can just use our rectangle tool, and then I'll choose a black fill, and then I'll draw a rectangle around the cat, like so. All right, and then I can leave sort of like part of its whisker or part of its tail out. And now once I have this rectangle, I can now just highlight and delete the cat, and I'll just recenter the rectangle. Okay, and I'll drag this before our normal cat sprite. All right, and now back inside of the code, before we do the up, down, and left, right movement, we can switch our cat to the hitbox costume, which is the black rectangle, and then after it does all of its up, down, and right, left movement code, we can switch back to our normal cat costume, which is costume 1. So now if we try this out, then as you can see, we still have our cat as normal. However, its head will not hang over the edge. Okay, and also one thing I forgot to add is to go to variables and set the x velocity to 0 along with the y velocity. All right, and now we have our cat sprite. However, if we want to add some movement animation, we have to create a new sprite. So this is optional, but if you want to make the cat walk, then we have to first duplicate our player, and then we have to rename one of these. So I'll rename this one to just hitbox, and I'll rename our player 2 sprite to just player. Okay, and inside of our hitbox sprite, let's go to costumes and delete our 2 existing cat costumes. So now we only have our hitbox costume, and inside of the code, we don't actually want these 2 switch costume to blocks. So let's take them out. And instead of those blocks, let's go to events, and we want to broadcast a message. So let's broadcast this before the 2 blocks, and let's create a new message, and I'll call this something like make player follow hitbox. All right. And now inside of our player sprite, which is going to be our actual cat image, let's first delete everything here. So I'll take out all of these blocks. All right. And now I'll drag a when I receive make player follow hitbox. Then, of course, I'll just make the player go to the hitbox sprite. Okay. So now if we make the hitbox invisible, which means going to looks and then setting the ghost effect to 100, then as you can see, we have our cat as normal with our hitbox. However, our cat does not face left or right, and we don't have our walking animation yet. So to do so, let's first go to our hitbox, and inside of there, we don't need the point in directions because our cat sprite will be doing that. So let's take that out from the hitbox, and inside of our player, which controls the actual cat image, we can delete our hitbox costume because that's already being used in our hitbox sprite. And for our cat, let's go to events, drag a when flag clicked, and let's first make it switch costume to its normal costume. So that's costume 1, which is the one where the cat is standing. And let's also go to motion and set its rotation style to left right, which we did before. And let's also make it point in direction 90, which means pointing towards the right like so. All right. And now under this when flag clicked, let's go to control and drag a forever loop, and let's grab an if else and check if key right arrow pressed. Then let's make it switch costume to the next costume. So that would be costume number plus 1. So let's drag costume number and go to operators, drag a plus, drag this on the left side and add 1 to it, and drag this entire thing inside of the switch costume tube. And by the way, of course, you can just use the next costume block, which is the exact same thing. However, if we want to check if the key left arrow is pressed, so right click duplicate, and then if left arrow key is pressed, then we have to do costume number -1 because there is no previous costume block. So let's go to operators and grab a minus and drag in costume number and -1. All right. And lastly, let's switch the costume to costume 1, which is its standing costume. And lastly, at the end of all of this, let's go to control and grab a wait. And this will be the delay between each costume change. So I'll just try something like 0.04 seconds for now. And now I believe we should be fine. So let's try it out. And okay, so as you can see, we do have our walking animation. However, the cat is not pointing towards the left. So this is an easy fix, but let's go to motion and point in direction 90 when the right arrow key is pressed, and point in direction -90 when the left arrow key is pressed. All right, so let's try it out. And as you can see, our cat moves left and right, like so. And it also does its walking animation. Okay, cool. So now that we have our cat completely finished, we now want to add multiple levels, because of course right now one level is pretty boring. So I'm going to start by making a few more costumes for my level sprite. Alright, so I made 2 more levels, one with some lava and another one with some platforms. And now to make the player go to the next level, let's go inside of the hitbox sprite, and I'll create a new custom block. So make a new block, and I'll call this something like check next level, and then click OK. And inside of this check next level block, we want to simply check if the player's X position, so go to operators and grab a greater than, and check if the hitbox X position is greater than a certain value to the right. So let's try something like 245. Then let's go to events and broadcast a new message. I'll call this something like next level, and then click OK. And we also want the hitbox to return to its starting position, which should be somewhere over here. So let's go to motion and grab a go to XY block, and let's put it somewhere over here. So that's X -203 and Y -7. And by the way, I set its spawn position over here as well. So let's type in -203 and Y -71. And actually, let's create variables for the player's spawn X and spawn Y. So let's go to variables and create a spawn X variable, click OK, and also spawn Y variable, and click OK. All right, so under when the flag is clicked, let's just simply set the spawn X to whatever value you have over here. So that's -203. And let's also set the spawn Y to your value in here. So that's -71. And make sure to put the set spawn X and spawn Y blocks before this go to XY block. All right. And lastly, we can just drag this spawn X in the X and spawn Y in the Y of the go to XY block. Okay. And we can also do the same for this go to XY block for when the player goes to the next level. So let's drag the spawn X over here and spawn Y over here. All right. And inside of the level sprite, of course, we want to go to events and drag a when and receive next level, then go to looks and next costume. And I'm also going to go to variables and create a level variable just to keep track of what level we are on. So click OK. And I'm going to hide all of these other variables other than the level variable. And we can also delete our my variable. And when the next level message is received, we can just simply change level by 1. And also we want to set level to 0 when the flag is clicked. And we also want to switch costume to costume 1 when the flag is clicked. And lastly, to make the level switching actually work, we have to go inside of the hitbox sprite and go to my blocks and drag this check next level block inside of the forever loop. All right, so let's try it out. And when the player reaches the edge, then okay. So it seems like the X position number is too large in here. So let's try decreasing it to something like 235. All right, so let's try it out. And when the player's X position is large enough, then as you can see, it goes on to the next level. All right, cool. And for now, all the levels repeat once we reach the end of all of the levels. All right. And now we want the player to reset once it touches the lava. So to do so, let's create a new block, and I'll call this check touching lava, and then click OK. And inside of this block, we can simply just go to control and check if, go to sensing, touching color, and then click this right here, and then click this button right here to select a color. And we can just select our color red in our game. And now if it's touching the red color, which is our lava, then we can just simply right click, duplicate, and go back to the character's original spawn X and spawn Y positions. Alright, and now for the check touching lava block, we can't actually just put this inside of the forever loop. Instead, we have to put this inside of the if touching level and right before the repeat loop of the up-down movement and also for the right-left movement. So make sure to add that to both, so inside of if touching level and before the repeat, and now we should be fine. So let's try it out. So once the player touches the lava, then as you can see, the player resets. Alright, cool. And lastly, of course, we want the player to reset once it falls off the edge like this. And to do so, let's create another new block and let's call this check fall off screen. Okay. And under this block, it's going to be really similar to this if statement. So let's right click, duplicate it. And instead of checking if X position is greater than 235, let's do if the Y position is less than, let's try something like -170 for now. Then inside of here, we can just simply go to spawn X and spawn Y, like we did with the lava. All right, and now inside of this forever loop, let's go to my blocks and drag in our check fall off screen. Okay, so let's try it out. So once we get to level 3, then if we try falling off, then as you can see, the player goes back to its starting point. All right, cool. Anyways, that's it for this video. We've managed to create a complete platformer with walking animations, multiple levels, collisions, and more. If you enjoyed this video, then give it a thumbs up and subscribe too, if you haven't already. By the way, this project is shared on my Scratch profile. Link is in the description below. Anyways, that's it for this video. See ya!